increasingly so, and we really wanted to take that on. We didn't want to pretend that this election thing that's happening isn't having a deep and serious internal impact on everybody who listens to us and everybody who doesn't listen to us.
I've always felt politics that way. I would say innately that this is a subject exactly for Dear Sugar Radio.
Yeah.
I know in the observations I've made in watching my friends and peers over these last few months, I absolutely have emotional reactions to the things they say. If I'm in disagreement with them, I have a negative feeling. And sometimes I've even questioned if we can keep being friends. It's a hard thing when you care passionately about the direction of our country or various social issues, when you see that somebody you care about and love is on the other side of that idea and has opposing views. And so it does get really personal immediately. I've always believed that. I don't know how the politics are ever just political. They're always personal.
That's right.
So we're going to delve into that today.
Yeah, and we'll do this actually in two parts because it's a big subject. The first, we'll talk about today, friends and family, the friends and family plan, and the way in which politics is intruding upon and complicating those kinds of relationships. And then next week, we will talk about sleeping with the enemy. When you are involved, your lover or your spouse, your partner is of a different political orientation and the chaos that brings into a love relationship.
Right. So let me read the first letter.
Let's do it.
Dear Sugars, I'm a young millennial who was raised in a fairly conservative environment. I came into my liberal views pretty young, and they've only gotten stronger as I've entered the nonprofit legal aid world. Growing up, I saw my parents as measured and wise, even if I disagreed with them. My mom is pro-choice, and they're pro-LGBT rights. My dad is on the board of an education nonprofit that serves inner-city youth. However, this election has changed everything. My mom has become straight-up hostile. I try to avoid politics because I'm passionate as well, and it always ends with screaming. Unfortunately, she can turn every conversation into an aggressive political nightmare. I bring up a TV show, and it's about how Hillary has lied about everything. I mention how weird the weather is, and it's about how gullible I am to have faith in Bernie. When my coworkers joke that they don't know anyone who's voting for Trump, I become the token friend whose parent is voting for Trump. My patience is forever for my parents. I love them, and I will always adore them. However, I'm sad that my respect is waning. Aren't you always supposed to respect your parents? How can I divorce their views from my feelings for them when it's all my mom will talk about? How can I avoid her combative nature while having a serious discussion about politics? I used to feel comfortable sharing my views and beliefs, but now I bite my tongue constantly so I'm not ganged up on by the ones I love. Best, Bleeding Heart.
Well, it is sad. You know, the real thing to cut underneath the politics a little bit is this is a young woman who really loves and adores and is loyal to her folks, and she's having to deal with the reality that she's losing esteem for them. She's losing respect for them. So that's what the election brings out.
Yeah.
And, you know, my counsel, Bleeding Heart, is to the extent that it's possible, try to be a good listener and figure out whether you view it as irrational or not. What's it about? What's the meaning of their having had this significant shift in the way that they view the world and the solution to the world's problems, at least politically? You know, when somebody becomes popular, a figure like Trump becomes popular, it's because he's activating a whole bunch of different things within different sorts of voters. There's complicated motives. What is it? How much of it is a sense of grievance? How much of it is a sense of loss? So that's my first piece of advice for you, Bleeding Heart, is listen to your folks and try to understand why they have become so aligned with and in support of this guy. And recognize that this election, for whatever set of reasons, has put your parents in a place that you cannot find respect for, but maybe you can find understanding for it.
Yeah. See, I think that's good advice, and yet it's not the advice that I'm going to give. I don't think that anything you said is invalid or incorrect, but my read of the situation is that she's tried to do that. And I think sometimes the best solution, when you do find that you are not going to be able to listen or be listened to, is that you decide to shut that down. And I think that the thing that will probably be the most constructive and protective of your relationship is to say to your parents, I love you, and we obviously don't agree politically right now, And so let us, through this very heightened season of the election,
Right.
just not talk about politics. There's a reason for that old adage that you don't talk about religion or politics. Now, if we're having an exchange of ideas, that's an intellectual argument that's stimulating and fun for me, I'm happy to do that. The minute that starts to spill over into really a sort of personal affront, I think that you should really avoid it. You are not going to convince your parents' bleeding heart to vote for anyone but who they want to vote for. And the same is true. They are not going to convince you to vote for Trump. So give it up.
Right.
That is my advice. I think that that's what you should do. Sometimes it's silence, and turning away is really the most loving solution.
I agree with that. I think what I want to say, though, is there's something powerful in your saying, I used to feel comfortable sharing my views and beliefs. And I think it's the part of you that connects to your parents who, even in this conservative environment, were pro-choice, supportive of gay rights, your dad doing good work in education. And at the center of this, and this happens oftentimes when the political becomes personal, is a kind of mourning of a loss of what, Lincoln says, the better angels of our nature, that there's some part of you that's saying, what happened to those parents? And my only point is, I hope somehow you can hang on to some way of connecting to them that does involve sort of shared values, but it may be that it's not this election season that's going to happen. And then you have to just make your peace with that.
Bleeding Heart is telling a story of conflict that's unfolding, in her childhood kitchen and her parents' home and, the old traditional face-to-face conflicts.
Yes.
But as we both well know, a stage upon which so many of these conflicts are taking place these days, social media, a lot of things can go wrong. This is why so many people, have been in arguments. Have you gotten ever in an argument on social media?
Oh, my God. Yes.
Of a political nature?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. You see it devolve incredibly quickly into ad hominem. And actually, that's a beautiful introduction to this next letter. Dear Sugars, for a while now, I've been struggling to reconcile my political views with friends on social media. I have friends who believe in causes I am stridently against and heartbroken by. An example would be the Sandy Hook shootings. A day after, a couple of friends felt the need to post memes in favor of guns. I defriended them and told them why. I know in my heart and in conversations with these friends that they are not for children being killed, but their remarks seemed insensitive. Every year, the online rhetoric gets uglier. I've contributed my fair share, unfortunately. I've defriended people after certain posts about shootings, the Paris attacks, anti-Muslim rhetoric, and comments against African Americans and other minority groups. I know how I might sound, narrow-minded, only willing to listen to my own version of each story, closed off. I feel, though, that if I listen to ugly comments and pretend they don't bother me, I'm part of the problem. I don't respond to a lot of comments because even though I love politics, the stress is too much, and the culture wars are exhausting. And I don't think people's minds are going to be changed by my take on any issue. And I like social media. I like hearing about the minutiae of people's days and the new things that have happened for them. I've lived in a few different states and have friends all over the country, and this has allowed me to keep in touch with them. I'm also from a small town and love the connection I feel online. So I guess what I'm really wondering is how I reconcile my friendships with the things I see on social media. How do I, or do I, keep these friends? I can unfollow them, sure, and I do this with some family members, but is it possible to pretend these comments don't exist? What do I do with people I thought I loved or just plain liked, only to find that they're xenophobic, homophobic, or misogynistic? Help. Sincerely, tired of defriending.
Ooh. I think tired of defriending, you are not alone. The upside of social media is exactly what you say. You get to stay connected to people you know. You even get to connect with people you don't know. And the downside of that is you get to hear what every damn member of this community thinks about any given issue of the day. I mean, it's interesting as I gave the same advice to the letter writer that we just discussed. It's like sometimes actually turning away is the best option. And this is something that's new for me, really. When I was in my 20s, I was a political activist, not just as a hobby. I actually was employed as a political activist for 2 different nonprofits. And my full-time job was to be a political agitator. And I also felt in my personal life that I was sort of the person who could carry the truth and I could make people see things my way. And so at every opportunity, I would really try to argue with people.
Right.
And I think that there's value in that, but I also realized that it wasn't resulting in me changing anyone's mind. And in some way, that kind of engagement was actually destructive to my own sense of like who I was as a political being and what kind of power I had.
Right.
And so part of this idea of me going more silent when it comes to engaging with other people politically has to do with actually, me thinking about, well, where can I invest the energy?
Right.
Where can I actually do good in the world as a political person?
Right.
And it's not going to be having fights with people on Facebook who post rage-filled comments.
Right.
So I disengage.
Right.
And it's really hard to do that. And I honestly, many times have actually typed out my very articulate comment that eviscerates their comment.
Right.
And then I press delete.
Yep.
And so tired of defriending, I really encourage you to do that because I think that, just that sort of turning away will be such a relief to you instead of this, constantly defriending, where then you're ending a relationship that probably shouldn't end just because you don't agree on this one thing.
Right. And, if you're distressed about the fact that misogyny and homophobia and everything else still exists in this world as they do, then become an activist in a way that really can change the conversation and change the culture, to the extent that it's possible. I don't feel that it's possible in a glancing way on social media. My advice is construct a social media world that you want, that works for you. And if you believe in causes and candidates, get engaged in some kind of activism that is of a more enduring and personal sort.
Well, and one of the things that we forget, even with the people we know in real life, is that when we see them online, on social media, we're just seeing this one face of them, this one moment. And it's so easy to forget all of their humanity. One of the most beautiful experiences I've had when it comes to this kind of political divide is when I was pregnant with Carver, my first child. Brian and I lived in this, we had just moved into this house. We moved in when I was like 4 or 5 months pregnant. And of course, immediately the lovely elderly couple across the street shows up on our doorstep and they brought us food and they were very welcoming. And within about 5 minutes, it became clear that not only were they incredibly right-wing politically, but also the woman of this elderly pair was really congratulating me on having this baby because she was vehemently anti-choice. And not only anti-choice, she actually volunteered at one of these like fake, pregnancy counseling clinics that lure women in and then show them terrible videos about like abortions and so forth. And I, mildly countered them and we had these little arguments. And every time we talked, we were aware of these political differences to the point where I sort of in my mind thought ill of them. And they perhaps thought ill of me, too. My son was born, a few months passed, and another neighbor who lived next door had a medical crisis. And he was all alone, and he needed us to help. And so Brian and I joined with these neighbors across the street, and we helped this man, and we got him the care he needed. And while he was away, the wife of this couple and I went to this guy's house, and we cleaned the house, and she remade all of his beds with, she went out and bought him, fresh sheets and blankets and remade his bed. And, we really made his house so nice. And I don't think that I've really met a kinder person than her. It was her idea that we do this, and she led the way. And when he got home from this place that he was at to get well, she cooked for him, and she cared for him, and she checked in on him. And I remember just thinking, okay, this is real life.
Right.
It's not about who they cast their vote for. And of course, politics matter, and they matter an awful lot to me.
Right.
But sometimes those of us who care about politics so much, we can forget what we do in our lives is what really matters.
Right. You just get this feeling of, why make politics so small? Why do we allow it to make us so small? So it's not narrow-minded so much as small-hearted. What's distressing about Bleeding Heart's letter, for instance, is that her mom and dad are screaming at her and bullying her. It doesn't matter that it's politics. I mean, maybe for the purposes of the show, it matters they're screaming at her. That the part of them that she admired, that helped her grow into the compassionate soul that she is they betrayed that. Now they're yelling at her. And that's, I think, what's so insidious, about our politics, and what's so beautiful about that story is it forces you to realize you can have a passionate set of beliefs, but to not let somebody's sort of personal beliefs get in the way of their larger humanity or your own. And I love that story, Cheryl. I think it's especially important because basically one of the letters that we got was a much more kind of wrenching example of the way that the political can become personal. I actually want to just call her and actually let her tell her own story. So let's do that.
Hello.
Hi, Kay. This is Cheryl Strayed.
Hi, Cheryl. How are you?
I'm great. I have Steve Almond here.
Hi, Steve.
Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us. You know, I don't know if you are a longtime listener of the show, but we very seldom get to talk to real letter writers.
I feel so honored to have the chance to speak to both of you.
Oh, great. Thank you. So we were really intrigued by your letter. As you know, we're doing an episode about how politics get personal and the personal gets political. And we thought that your letter was really quite an intense one. And instead of reading your letter, we just thought it would be interesting to have you tell us your story. What's happened in your life in this realm?
Okay. Well, I guess my story starts about 8 years ago almost now. Shortly after Obama was elected. And it was Christmas Eve, and we were celebrating with our extended family. And my uncle asked to give what I thought was going to be a prayer before dinner and asked that I stand next to him with my baby. And instead of a prayer, he began a political speech that began by kind of referencing that he knew that some of us had supported Obama and that he forgave us for that, but that his big concern now was that we focus on kind of the ramifications of Obama taking office. And at that point, he began
it's hard to talk about, isn't it? It's personal.
Yeah. He began to talk about abortion, and he was using my baby, who we had recently adopted and who is Black, as his example. So over and over, he pointed to my baby and said, when you look at this baby, I want you to think about all the Black babies who are aborted in this country. Every time you look at this baby, I want you to think about the implications of Roe v. Wade.
Wow.
And it was just so unexpected that I did nothing.
Right.
Which is still really hard for me to think about, because it feels like I failed my son in that moment.
Right. And can I just pause there? I mean, I just want to say, to console you in that moment, I think so many of us have done that, where we're so shocked and appalled by something that someone has said that you'd like freeze because you just don't know what to say.
Because you got ambushed.
You got ambushed.
Yes, that's a good word.
Yeah.
So it was a very sad Christmas for me. And I felt like I spent the rest of the holidays just kind of reliving that moment. So I'm not a very confrontational person, but this really was eating away at me, and I felt like I wasn't doing right by my son if I didn't speak up for him. So I put a lot of thought into it, and I wrote a letter to my uncle, and I worked really hard on it to make sure that I was clear that I didn't think he had done this maliciously. I knew his religious beliefs and his political beliefs, and I knew that they weren't necessarily in line with my own, but I know that those beliefs are really important to him. So I acknowledged that and said, I think that you felt strongly about this and you weren't trying to hurt us, but you did. And then I kind of spelled out for him that if he was going to continue to be involved in my children's lives, that this would never happen again.
So you send the letter, you mail the letter, And what happened next?
Yeah, and then I waited and waited, and nothing happened. And I actually felt okay with that. I felt like, okay, he knows my feelings. And then out of the blue, I got a letter in reply from my aunt, a very long, very angry letter. And she told me that she had intercepted my letter to my uncle.
Nice.
And that,
in other words, stolen his mail. Okay.
Right. And that he had not seen it and never would. And then she spent several pages telling me what a good Christian man he was and how I should have felt honored that he had used my son as his example in the speech, and that she thought I had been raised better. And then I got very angry.
Yeah. Ouch. And what about your parents? Are they related to this aunt and uncle?
My aunt would be my father's sister.
Okay.
So that was one of the difficult parts of this, is they are his only living family, and he's their only living family. So it was hard for him to have there be this conflict between us. And I think he understood and supported me, but I think a part of him also wished that I could just let it go to kind of keep the peace.
So what's happened since? You were furious with your aunt, and then what?
Well, I kind of thought to myself, like, she's made the choice here. I said, this is what I need from you for you to be involved in my children's lives, and she's not respecting that. I mean, if he didn't even know that I was offended, then I have no reassurance that he wouldn't do a similar thing again.
Right.
So we have not seen them since then, which the first year was very difficult for my dad and for my aunt, who I don't think was expecting. I think she kind of thought she was going to put me in my place and things would go back to the way they were. But I just didn't feel like I could do that.
Wow. So what is your question for us? What are you grappling with? I think you set a boundary, and that was that you needed an agreement from your uncle that he wouldn't talk about those issues in your presence and in the presence of your children. And he never received that message. And so you said, okay, well, then we're not going to be around you. Where are you at now? Like, what are you wondering about in your relationship with them?
I think on a day-to-day basis, I don't even think about it. But, every once in a while things come up that kind of bring it to the forefront. Right now, my aunt is actually battling cancer. And I feel like it's caused me to think about my feelings towards them a lot. I think what I struggle with is how strongly I still feel about it, that it's still hard for me to talk about it, that I still feel angry when I do. I don't know. I just feel like, is it normal to set a boundary and then still feel so emotional about it such a long time later?
Well, I want to ask you, Kay, about just a couple of things that were in your letter that I think changed the complexion of how this interaction went down. The first thing is that in your letter you write that your uncle said something along the lines of not just think about all the innocent black babies murdered by abortion, but goes on to say every time you look at this baby, think about how the blacks are killing their own. And that he also used the phrase black genocide. And I wonder about that, because that speaks to a kind of not just racial insensitivity, but a kind of animus and prejudice that would complicate, even if you could reach an agreement. The sentiments he was expressing feel to me racist, quite clearly.
Very racist.
I think the listeners need to understand that he wasn't just saying this is about abortion and the sanctity of life and so forth. This is an uncle who, sort of using that as his Trojan horse, was actually expressing some pretty virulent racist views about African Americans, which your son is. The other thing that I thought was striking in your letter is just that you actually in that moment took your baby and went in a bedroom and cried. And I don't blame you for a second, but I do wonder, where is everybody in that room? Where is your partner? Where is your folks? Who is not standing up for you? I mean, I would love it if that was happening, but short of that, who was attending to you and recognizing that she really just got ambushed there?
Yeah. I think that my whole family felt as shocked as I did in that moment. What I remember is when his speech ended and it was time for dinner, I walked into the kitchen and my mom said to me, "What the hell was that?" Which is not my mother.
Right.
That was strong language coming from her. And I think we kind of, I hardly even remember, but I think my mom and I just kind of said, like, we're going to get through this and we're going to talk about it later.
But then what happened, Kay, what's interesting about that, first of all, I think it's going to be so familiar to so many of our listeners. It's certainly familiar to me. This approach, which is, okay, somebody just said something really offensive and ghastly. And so as to avoid embarrassment and conflict, let's whisper to each other, that was a mess. And then onward we go. And then let's kind of just pretend that never happened and hope for the best. And what you did, which is so powerful and so amazing and so beautiful. And thank you for doing that. Just you said, listen, I'm not going to expose my child, or it sounds like you have children, to this kind of behavior, these words, because they're damaging. So I think that that was a really powerful move, but it sounds like you did it within a family system that is essentially built on silence and avoidance and denial and let's just push this stuff under the rug.
Right.
You know, you're the troublemaker. This is what your aunt's letter was. Why are you making so much trouble? And, you know, I think that's the misunderstanding. She really thought, like you said, that you were going to go back into your proper place as soon as she told you to go there. I'm mad for you. Now I'm getting all angry.
Right.
But, you know, I mean, on the other hand, like what I also want to say is, as you know, I mean, the reason I think that you're a little conflicted about this is, you know, there are other parts of your aunt and uncle that there are times that you probably have had with them that you treasure and value. And you know that they aren't just that guy up there ranting about, you know, abortion, right?
Black genocide. Right.
Yeah, I think in some ways it was kind of shocking. You know, we were just adjusting to being a family that's noticeable and different. And it certainly wasn't the first time that something had been said to us that we found offensive. But to have it come from someone that I trusted to be safe and healthy for my family made it much, much worse and kind of made our life as a family just feel more unsafe. Like if this could happen in our family home at the holidays, it just for a while felt like this could happen anytime, anywhere.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What's the best outcome for you? Do you want to reunite with your aunt and uncle and mend that relationship? Do you want to have a conversation with them for closure and not have a relationship with them? Do you want to leave it as it is and just work on getting over your anger? What do you want to do? What would be the best case scenario be?
I don't think that I want contact with them. I don't feel like they are healthy for my children. And I don't feel like we could reach a place that was healthy for me. So I think what I've aimed for is to kind of be gracious in all of this and to not inflict any more hurt or pain than is necessary, but also to keep that boundary clear. So when I heard about my aunt's diagnosis, I sent her a get well card, and I guess what I want is to feel okay saying, I'm not going to try and fix this. You made your choice.
But you want to say that, it sounds to me, with at least an air of goodwill.
Yeah.
I mean, there's such a difference. I have decided not to have relationships with certain members of my family as well. And I really found that it was so much better to do that once I'd reached a place of not being angry anymore than when I was still angry. Because when you're not angry anymore, what you can actually say sincerely is, I wish you the best, and I will hold you in positive regard, even though I don't want to have contact with you or have a relationship with you.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, and that that was a years-long journey for me. And I think that you can get there, but I think maybe that you haven't totally forgiven every aspect of it yet, that there's more forgiveness to be done. And I think part of that might be identifying who else you're angry at. And sadly, I have to say, I think about your parents in that situation.
And your partner.
I understand why they didn't speak up. Well, I trust that her partner's with her. But the question is, like, your parents who now continue to have this relationship with your aunt and uncle, why haven't they been, advocates for you and saying, listen, there's a reason that she has cut you out of her life. You said really offensive things. Maybe that, you're still holding that anger because you feel betrayed really by people who are even closer to you, your parents. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it hurts to think about that. But it does feel, sometimes I feel like I'm taking the blame for not mending fences. That things would be easier if I would move on and let bygones be bygones, and I'm not.
They would be, yeah, and harder for you. Easier for everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what's happening. And it's really a really ancient pattern. Like, it's the blaming the victim kind of pattern where, we don't hold the person who's done wrong accountable. We tell the victim that she should be quiet and go onward. If we can do anything for you today, we can say, you've done the right thing. You aren't the person who's caused this problem.
Right. I still want to ask one question.
Okay.
Where is your partner in all this?
He's been very supportive. We were actually just talking about this last night, kind of going through like what do you remember? And it was not funny at the time, but we were actually kind of laughing about it last night. What I recall is, him coming and comforting me and taking care of our older child for the evening and putting him to bed, and then getting very, very drunk, which is also out of character for him. So that was a rough Christmas Eve in a lot of ways.
Yeah, sounds like real fun. But, I have to say, Kay, I don't have that same question as Steve, because I can see this so clearly. I wonder if you're from the Midwest.
I am.
Okay, I knew it. I know this. I know this. This is such a classic. It's the night. We are nice in the Midwest, Steve.
Nice.
I know you guys on the coast. Speak
our minds,
you're all just like, rah, but we are good. We are nice. Kay and I, we are nice Midwestern girls. Okay, and so when trouble comes, you go in the bedroom and cry, and then you get drunk. But this is a very familiar thing, and I think a lot of people, it's not that her husband wasn't on her side or appalled by what was said. He too was, conforming to what is expected, and that is to not make waves.
Right. And I understand that in particular if he's sort of, quote unquote, an in-law, it's not his family, it's not his place. I think what I'm reacting to is the sense that you had to shoulder all of this yourself, and that there's a kind of enabling when there's a discourse that goes from being about expressing your own beliefs to really disrespecting somebody else and disrespecting somebody else's child in a way that's clearly racist against the race of that child. To me, it crosses a boundary. It's inappropriate, it's cruel, and I think I'm sort of feeling a sense of lamentation that somebody didn't stand up and say, you know what, if you have a problem with our sitting president, okay, but you've gone a step too far. He just wants to be able to get up and make declarations and never have to face any pushback. It's such an entitled way to move through the world. It's sort of the ultimate white male privilege. You never have to answer for your comments, no matter how crazy and hurtful they are. But I understand that it's much more complicated in the moment, and everybody's sort of reeling from the experience, and as Cheryl said, trying to sort of pretend it didn't happen to make the evening bearable.
Well, and what I want to say is the most important person who needs to stand up for UK stood up for herself.
Right.
Sometimes we have those conflicts with family members over political issues, and they never get resolved, and they have real consequences. They have consequences that drive us apart. And I was so cheered and touched to hear that when you found out your aunt was ailing, you wrote her a note. And I think that things like that mean a whole lot in the end. And I would encourage you, I think that, that kind of extending yourself with loving kindness has a way of, healing, if not that relationships, at least healing your own heart. And I think that anger, the more you can do things like that, the more you can bear to, send that Christmas card or remember their birthdays and just say, thinking of you today, I hope you're well. What you're doing is dissipating that anger that you have, rightly so, and really offering yourself with love and generosity.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that that reaching out to them, even though it will be hard to do, would be healing in some ways.
Yeah, and it's not about, you don't have to even relitigate any part of it. What's so kind of astonishing and beautiful in your letter, and it struck both Cheryl and I immediately, was this person is full of grace, that she would not just craft a letter, but craft a letter, that you really put some thought into, and that said, I understand where you're coming from, and I respect your right to want to say what you want to say and what your beliefs are. You didn't just launch a broadside against him, and you would have been well within your rights to say, what do you think you're doing? But you gave him every opportunity, every benefit of the doubt, and tried to be empathic. And I think that's actually what you try to do. And sometimes it works, and sometimes, it's very sad, but they can't meet you there.
Well, Kay, I hope we were helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Really interesting to have this discussion with you.
Thank you so much.
I know a lot of our listeners will relate to this. I mean, yours is pretty extreme, but boy, it can get pretty gnarly there with the family members about the politics, especially in election season. I think it's so fascinating that this happened right after Obama had won the election.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, this is the season we're in now. There's a lot of really heated emotions.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Kay.
Okay,
Have a
thank you.
lovely rest of your day, and good luck to you and your family.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
It was such a pleasure talking with you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Last Seen, a new podcast from WBUR and the Boston Globe, investigates the largest unsolved art heist in history.
So about the time that he begins putting the duct tape on, he says, this is a robbery.
The theft of $500 million worth of art from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston.
When the FBI says, we solved it, we know who did it, it's like, no, you don't, because you don't have the paintings.
Subscribe and listen to Last Seen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sponsored by Samuel Adams and ADT Smart Home.
I'm Michelle Goldberg.
I'm Ross Douthit.
And I'm David Leonhardt. We're the hosts of The Argument, a new podcast from the New York Times opinion section. These days, it's more important than ever to listen to people who disagree with you. Maybe they'll teach you something new, or maybe they'll just teach you how to beat them. So listen to The Argument from the New York Times. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen.
I love talking to the people who write to us. This is a fun experiment up Dear Sugar Radio.
She's a pretty extraordinary person.
She is.
I mean, I think this really has everything to do with what we've been talking about with all of these letters, which is you have to live, especially in a political season, with the idea that there are people close to you who hold views that you find abhorrent. And how do you enlarge yourself so that you don't feel dragged down by them or dragged into something that you don't want to get into?
Yeah. And the advice we've given to all three of these letter writers is really, it's up to you. It's about your relationship with yourself, the decisions you make. It's not about convincing somebody else to vote for your candidate or see your truth or view the world your way or even speak in terms that are, palatable to you. It really is about you deciding where you draw the boundaries, where you decide not to engage, where you decide to call people on their mistakes and offenses, and where you decide to turn away. And it really is that relationship you have with yourself that is going to allow you to survive this heated time.
It's true, man. Your karma has to outrace your dogma.
Yeah. I'm still going to continue to try to get you onto my side and vote for my candidate, okay?
I'm totally ready for that. But you know what we're going to do next week is we're going to take it another step, which is, okay, family, friends, that is its own fresh hell. Now it's your lover, it's your partner, it's your beloved who feels very differently politically.
So tune in next week and you will hear even bigger, graver, bloodier baths.
Sexier.
Sexier. You are listening to the highly political Dear Sugar Radio, which is produced by WBUR.
We are produced and edited by our local campaign manager, Lisa Tobin. 2016.
That's right. Our theme music is by the Portland musicians known as Wonderly, vocals by Liz Weiss.
Listen and subscribe on iTunes to Dear Sugar Radio, and also write to us at dearsugarradio@gmail.com.
And just think, we have until Election Day to tell Steve Almond who we think he should vote for.
Oh, my God.
So send us your emails and let us know. So do we need to...
You were so on it. You're
Okay.
like, you're from the Midwest, aren't you?
I know.
Almond's not getting it.
I know. You kept being like, but what? I'm like, Steve, Jesus
Wait a second.
Christ.
Why didn't you get a lawyer? Right.
But